Hello and welcome to this video about using lab.js and Prolific Academic along with JATOS in order to collect participants. And this is specifically designed for surveys and experiments. And essentially this video is about giving you an answer, which is what if you can't get participants and you're struggling to get participants and you're willing to just throw money at the problem. Now I've already done another video which shows you how to use Mturk, which is an alternative service that you can use in order to pay participants to do your research. But unless you're specifically advised by your tutor to use Mturk, I'd recommend that you use Prolific Academic because I think it comes with a number of advantages. In order to do this, we're going to be using three services. We're going to be using lab.js to build our study. We're going to be using JATOS to host our study, and we're going to be using Prolific Academic in order to direct participants to our study. So with that being said, I want to start off by giving us a warning. And the warning is that Prolific is a service where you can pay to have participants complete your experiment. If you do not set up your experiment correctly, you will end up wasting your money. So it's really important to make sure that you pilot your study, that you're comfortable with the data it produces, and that you're happy with that. If you find that you don't do any of those things, that will cause problems. Equally, before putting your experiment live, I really urge you to check with both the psychology technician and your supervisor to make sure that your experiment works how it should. Equally, it's never a bad idea to just do a few participants to begin with, to just pilot your study, and now talk to you briefly about how you do this. Equally, throughout this video I will be using test servers because I don't want to kind of put my money into this video, and in which case you need to not copy the links that I use in the web browsers, but I will give you some links to use. Okay. So about Prolific Academic, so it was created in 2014 by two graduate students, one from the University of Sheffield, one from the University of Oxford, and they were basically annoyed by not being able to find participants themselves, so that's why they created this service. And at the time there was another service called Mturk, which is run by Amazon, and they weren't happy with the data they were getting from Amazon. They felt people were trying to game the system and they weren't getting quality data, so they started up their own service. Okay, and they did a few crucial differences. So firstly, and we can kind of show you this, Prolific is designed to be kind of more academic in its focus. So in other words, you're more likely to get kind of academic research on here, whereas Mturk tends to be kind of more commercial in focus. Equally, they felt that Mturk tended to exploit their participants a lot more, whereas Prolific has kind of goals in place to make sure that you don't exploit your participants and you give them a reasonable rate of pay. So one of the things they insist is that you give them a minimum of, I think, $6.50 an hour, but they recommend you pay them something like $7.50 an hour. And that's because they're very keen on not wasting the participants' time and treating them unfairly. Another key differences with Prolific, which is one of the reasons why I'm strongly recommending you use it, is they've given people a pre-screening questionnaire when they signed up, and that means you can better target participants. So for example, if you want people who drink more than the recommended amount, then you can use a screening tool to get those people. Whereas with Mturk, you just get anyone. So there has been research done on this, and here are two papers I found. And if I just read the quote, so we found considerable differences between the audiences, especially in relation to comprehension, attention, and dishonesty, as Prolific showed it was superior to all the other options. So I think they compared Qualtrics panels, they compared Amazon Mturk, and they found that with Qualtrics panels or with Mturk, participants were more likely to lie, they were less likely to be paying attention, and they were less likely to show high levels of comprehension. which they argued is kind of the core principles of things that we want from participants. Okay, they have produced a comparison page. Now, obviously, take this with a pinch of salt, because they're obviously trying to sell a service here, but they make a point that their commission is lower, but realistically, you pay more for Prolific in my experience, because you tend to be paying them a lot at a higher amount, so therefore the percentage tends to be higher. And they've got a pricing calculator, which I'll show you in a bit. Okay, they obviously have fewer participants doing the experiments or taking part in the activities than Mturk, but you tend to get a higher caliber of participants in my experience. They tend not to be as kind of devious and also naive to experiments, which can be quite useful. You can also do things like you can give bonuses if they complete it correctly, and you can message participants anonymously, which is quite useful. So Prolific has really useful features if you want to kind of set up longitudinal studies. So if you want to have participants complete your research at multiple time points. So that's kind of some of the key differences here. But one of the main kind of disadvantages to Prolific over Turkers is that there are few of them. So something to bear in mind. So here's a pricing calculator, which I'll show you as part of setting up your experiment anyway, and the same with the screening tool. Okay, they produce some do's and don'ts, and one of the key things about Prolific Academic is they consider themselves to be an ethical service, whereas Amazon maybe not so much. And they insist that you set reward weight of at least £5 an hour or $6.50 an hour in order to ensure that you're paying your participants fairly. And they recommend that you want at least £7.50 an hour. So you're kind of getting towards the living wage there, I believe, or you're certainly above the minimum wage. And one of the things they kind of stress is that if they think that you're acting unethically or you're being too harsh to your participants, so you're rejecting them without good reasons, you should, they'll override your decision and they'll fine you and they'll still pay the participants. So you can't get away with that. And I'll show you how to make sure you link back to check that they've completed the experiment fairly and everything like that later on. But just some do's and don'ts for you to have a look at, and there's a web link there if you want to read in more detail. You'll need to use something called JATOS. So JATOS is the means that you host your experiment. So I will show you how to set that up shortly. And I mentioned earlier that you shouldn't be using the links that I use in this video, but here are the links you should be using. So for Prolific, to access Prolific, you should be using prolific.co. For Mindprob, which is a free server, so it allows you to host your experiment online. And the nice thing is, with Mindprob, as well as getting people directly from Prolific, you can also go out and share your link on social media and various things like that. And if you've done 515, then this website, lab.js, should be fairly familiar with you. Okay, so with that being said, let's go and see how we would set this experiment up. So here's an experiment that I created earlier. And then just to show you that we've got a participant information sheet, we've got a consent form, and then we've got an example of a BDI. So this is where we would give them the Beck's Depression Index and get them to respond to a series of multiple choice questions. We've then got the perceived stress scale, which is where you get them to rate their perceived stress. And then you've got a Stroop task, just as an example. So you can see that you can have both questionnaires and you can have experiments as well. So you can see it's nice and versatile. Okay, you can also see that we've got a transmission link here in order to transmit the data to Jatos. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick demonstration and I'm going to fast forward this. One of the key things that I want you to appreciate is I've also built in attention captures so that you can check that someone's paying attention. So let's give it a go. So you've got the participant information sheet and consent form here. So we've got our first attention capture here, so I'm going to choose this option to show that I'm paying attention. We've got our secondary caption here, so I'm going to choose this option here to show that I'm paying attention. And once again, you notice that the attention captures are always in different places and they're not distinctive in the way that they're set out in terms of the questions. Then we've got the perceived stress here, so I'm just going to go through here. And I'm going to choose this option here to show that I'm paying attention. Now I have made a potential slight error here where I've put both of them saying please choose very often in order to show you're paying attention. Now ideally one of them should be kind of never and the other one should be very often. Then I'm going to click continue. I'm going to get the score and then I'm going to get the Stroop task. And then what I would do is I obviously make sure that it works locally and that it gives me the data I want. So I can click and just view the Excel spreadsheet. And you can see here that I get a total for BDI. So it means I don't have to do stuff in SPSS. And I also get a total for the attention capture, which in here is 1 and 2. So you can see that for the attention capture for this, I get a score of 2. And then you'll see that I also get an attention capture score for the PSS. And what this means is I can quickly look down the column, see who's paying attention, who isn't paying attention, and what I need to do about it. So that is often particularly useful. So once I've done that, I'm now ready to go and put this on Jatos. So Jatos, just to remind you, is the service we use to host it. Now I am using just a test server. So please don't use this version, but the version that you'd want to use is the Mindprob. So if I just go here, you can request an account, and basically all you need to do is email this email address, info@mindprob.EU, with your kind of a brief description of what you want your experiment to be about, and they'll sign you up with an account. They promise to kind of approve all non-spam, non-abusive requests, so it's fairly straightforward. They ask that to be ethical and not to overwhelm the servers, that you please talk to them if you're planning to do any of the following. So if you've got a very large number of participants, so over 100, so you might find that if you're using Prolific or you're using Twitter or something like that, you might do that, so you might want to just warn them about that. Or if you're kind of transmitting video or audio because you've got a very high usage. So if you were to do that, then you just need to be aware of that. And I think this server, their guarantee runs till the year 22 at least. But it's one of those things where they often extend it. You might find as well that we have access to our own server as well. But for the time being, I'd recommend you just use Mindprob, as that's the easiest. So what I'm going to do is you'll get Jatos, and you'll end up with, when you log into Jatos, you'll end up with a server that looks like this. So what we want to do is go and export the experiment from lab.js and then import it into Jatos. So to do that, we come down here, we go to Jatos, click there, and it downloads a experimental file. So what we would then do onto our server, which is here, click import, click import study, import, and you can see that we've got something called example prolific study. Now, for those of you who have seen my Mturk video, you'll see that this procedure is is exactly the same as the Mturk procedure, but nevertheless. Okay. So what we now want to do is go and log into Prolific and then go and set up our experiment. So if I go onto here, you can sign up here should you wish to, but I've already created an account, so I'm going to click login. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create new study, and we're going to call this a few things. So let's call this stress and depression and Stroop. Now obviously this would be taken from your participant information sheet if you were designing that. You've then got an internal one, so let's call it, I don't know, PYU611 stress or something, or whatever. Okay, you've then got a description here, which you can kind of adapt your participant information sheet for that. If you also click here like so, it gives you a load of advice about what you should include. So the aim of your study, what participants are required to do, if there's any sensitive information. And it's one of those things where I would probably get your supervisor to just look over it to just check they're happy. You would also include other information like if there's a bonus. So sometimes if you want to make sure that they return for a second part, or you want to make sure that they pay attention, you might offer them a bonus. Okay, so you can see that that is how you'd write the information for that. And you'd put the information there. You'd then say that it needs to be done on either a desktop, tablet or mobile. You can obviously untick those as you see fit. If your experiment involves audio, you tick audio. If it involves the use of them speaking, using a microphone, you would tick that option. Okay. Then it comes here and it says what is your link to your study. So what I would typically do is go here like so, and then I would go on to batch, and I would create a new batch and call it, I don't know, let's call it dissertation or whatever really, and then click create, and then I drop down here, and you either have a choice of general single worker or general multiple worker. I'd probably recommend that you go for general multiple worker. You tick this option here, you then come down here and you go get link. And this will allow your participants to take the experiment multiple times. If you don't want that, then you can go for single worker. The only slight disadvantage of a general single worker is that if participants click on the experiment and then for some reason click off, then that will cause a problem. So I recommend that you probably go for general multiple worker and just make it clear that you won't be paying them if they do it twice. Okay, so we will put that in there. You also have the option of I want to use URL parameters, and this will allow you to basically include parameters back to the JATOS. So you can see that it's added bits on the end, and that means that their prolific ID will end up in your JATOS dataset. So that is particularly useful. And then what I'd recommend you do is you say I'll redirect them using a URL, and then it gives you this to copy. So you copy this, and then you go back to JATOS. Go on to properties. So if we go back to the study of interest, go on to properties, and then you'll see an option which says end redirect URL. You copy and paste the link from here, so that's the link you would go and copy and paste into there. So once again, what you would do is you make sure that it works, and you make sure you test it thoroughly before putting it live, because you don't want to waste your money. So now JATOS and Prolific are set up, so that's good. So what we can now do is go and look at some stuff. So there is an option here where you can decide whether you want to do a representative sample, which is where you want a spread of a range of participants. And bear in mind, participants won't know how they're picked. They'll just get a notification via email, and that's normally sent out every 48 hours. Or they've installed a browser add-on that allows them to get alerted every time that a prolific study that they can take part in becomes available. So if you go on to pre-screen participants here, you can actually see that you can specify various things. So you can do things like specify gender, ethnicity simplified, ethnicity more complicated, religious relationship status, sexual orientation. So let's go and look at health, for example, and you can see, for example, whether they've had a COVID vaccine or whether they've been in alcohol therapy, what units of alcohol they consume. So if we click there, you can see that you can specify 14 plus, so that would indicate that they have a drinking problem, for example. And then if you were to go apply, and that way you can specify precisely who you want to be in your study. So this makes it tremendously powerful, particularly if you're interested in looking at different demographic factors. And it will tell you that 4,189 people match your criteria who've been active in the last 90 days. Now obviously you're not going to get all of those people, but it can be useful to kind of get that. Okay, so now this is how you kind of define your audience. I'm just going to go for everyone for the time being, but you can clearly specify certain criteria. And then what you would do is you would say, well, how many people you're looking for. So if you're looking for a sample size of 200, and then you would say, how long will it take? And then let's say you guesstimate this. So let's say you guesstimate it takes you 5 minutes. And what the service will do is, after the first couple of people have completed it, it will then update the amount of time it takes. And it will say to you, do you want to change? Well, you'll need to add more funds or you'll need to pay them more. Because one of its key things is that you need to be on a reasonable amount of time. So you can see that for 200 people, for 5 minutes of work, and I'm paying them 63p each because it's on a pro rata basis. You can see that there is a cost breakdown, and you can see that the service fee is £42 and the participants' payments is 126. So you can see roughly that for a reasonable amount of money, and if your surveys are fairly quick, then you can quite easily get participants, I wouldn't say cheaply, but relatively cheap. So it will probably cost you more money than doing on Mturk, but you will get better data and you will be able to filter out participants. Okay. So one thing that I and Prolific recommend before putting your study live is to do a small sample for a pilot test. So this tends to be about, say, 5 people. So you can come down here and you can specify 5 people like so. And the other thing that I'd recommend you do is you go and use the pre-screening feature. You go and filter by, you can go and specify that an approval rating. You generally want people who've got a high approval rating. So if we slide it like this, you can say that they want a approval rating of, say, 75%. Click apply, and that means that you will just get good participants to pilot your study. You also want to be very obvious to make sure that they know that they're taking part in a pilot study. So initially what I would do is put something in the description to say they're taking part in a pilot study. And if you do that, then you can easily pilot your data on real people. Now, if you find that there aren't any problems, then you can incorporate their data into the actual proper study. And if you find there are problems, well, you've saved yourself a lot of aggravation, which could have occurred due to them finding out there's a problem and then collecting all your data. You can also be more transparent with participants. Now, if I click publish, you'll see that you'll need to top up your account. So you click on top up now, and then please select an option. So I do not have that number. And then basically you enter in your card details, you enter in the amount, and it's kind of pay as you go. So you top up the amount before you can have your study put live. And then once you do that, you do publish. So I'm not going to do this at this time, but that's how you would do it. But what I'm going to do is go preview. So this is once again how you would check to make sure that your experiment works correctly. You would also specify how long it would take, what the hourly rate is, and this is what the participants would basically see. So you open a study, you then get the participant information sheet. They would agree to all of that. And then you see that they get an automatic redirect here saying that this is their completion code, so they might want to copy that. And it says that the URL worked correctly, so you can close window. So that means that A, the participant would now get paid, or they could now get credit for the study. And B, you will now find that if you go on to Jatos here and then look at the results, you will now see that you've got one result which you can go and download and play with. So let's go and do that. So click on results, click on export results, click on all, and then you see it downloads it as a TXT file. So what we now want to do is go onto here and import it. So let's go file, let's go open. And then we need to go and specify this and break it up. So we're going to say it's delimited. We're going to click next. We're going to say it's separated by a semicolon, by a comma. And untick tab. Click next. And then click finish. And what you can see is that we have some results here. It's separated them out, but you can see that it has done it. So let's just go and see if we can find an example. So you can see that it's labeled them as, for example, A, B, and it's put it in quotation marks. So if you look here, we can see the process we have to go through in order to get this. So you would import the data, you'd copy everything before the column using this code here, which would be left, and then click to see where it would go. You would copy and paste the values so it goes across. You remove the question mark and potentially do any additional scoring you want to do. Then save it as an XLS file, and then you import it into SPSS. Now, because I thought that was a bit hard sell, what I've done is created a very rough piece of code here that should do this for us. So we've now gone to here, go Alt F11, click on this sheet here, click paste, click save, then do Alt F8. You see that it comes up with this thing here. Click run, give it a moment or so. And what you can see is that this has now tidied up our data. So we've got it in a nice order. Now, bear in mind that I only had one participant here because I only tested it myself. But you've essentially got the data in a nice Excel spreadsheet. And what we can do is we can go and we can then go and import this into SPSS. So I'm just going to check that we've got what we need. We have. So it's given us everything that we need. So I'm just going to go File, Save As. I'm going to save it as a Excel file. I'm then going to give this a different name, so I'm going to call it Data to Use. I'm then going to go onto SPSS and then do File, Open, File, Import Data, Excel. Click Open, click OK. And then what we can see is that we've got our data. So what we can now do is, if there were any other pre-processing that we would need to do, we could do that. I recommend that if you're doing any pre-processing with the Stroop experiment, so if you're filtering out correct responses, then I've got other videos on that will show you how to do that. One thing that we need to do as well is I just want to show you a few more things. So one of them is really important, and that is once you would have completed everything. So one thing that you would possibly be wanting to do is go and approve your participants. So if you come down here, you can look at completed. I've not got any completed ones because I've not actually put the study live, but you would go down, you'd check that you were happy with the participants, and you would then go and approve them. And the way that you check that you're happy with the participants is you make sure that they've responded to your study appropriately by using the attention captures. Okay, so a couple of recommendations before I go, and also to show you how you can find out what participants think of your research. You can keep your experiment as short as possible. Pilot your study. It's really important that you do that. So set a small sample size like 5 participants. Filter by high approval rate and make it clear that it's a pilot study in the description. Use fair pay, which is what Prolific recommend, because you will get better quality participants. Be clear about the length of your study, so you can find that out by piloting it, and also it will update it. Try to use a mixed or within subjects design rather than between, and that way you control for things like browser issues or things like that. Expect your participants not to be as naive as, say, the typical undergraduate student, and to be aware of a lot of the paradigms used within psychology. Think about the time you run your experiment, so don't run it at kind of 5 o'clock on Saturday, because you often won't get people there. You're more likely to get them kind of while they're doing other work or while they're looking for something to do. And use attention captures to make sure that your participants are paying attention, but don't make them too harsh, because if you make them too harsh, they will appeal and will get approved anyway. So just kind of do the ones that I showed you. If you want to know what participants think of your study, you can find a link here where they will be commenting on your study and looking at various things like that and talking about the studies that they like. From the point of view of the people taking your studies, they view Prolific much more positively than Mturk. So that unfortunately they don't see it as having as many studies, but often people sign up for both. But they see Prolific as having a high rate of pay, more interesting studies, and less chance of getting rejected. So it means that you often get a better quality of participant. A couple of other things to just point out that Prolific can do. So it will allow you to pre-screen the participants, which is quite useful. You can also create a list of participants barred from taking your experiment or study. So if you've run a variation of your study and you don't want people to do your study twice, you can do that. Equally, if you find that there are difficult participants, you can bar them that way. That's really good for running a longitudinal study, because what you do is you get them to sign up, and then you get them to, you essentially give Prolific a list of participants who can do the next series of studies, and you can also give them a bonus if they complete all the studies. So that means you get people who are really motivated to do longitudinal studies. You can message participants privately, which can be quite useful. And you can also, every potential participant will get emailed every 48 hours to be alerted to your study, or instantly if they've got the browser extension. So that is essentially how you can use Prolific, JATOS and lab.js to put your questionnaire or experiment online and have participants complete your questionnaire. If you've got any questions, please email me on c.higton@newman.ac.uk. Thank you very much for your time.